The year is 1184. The frozen plains of Awazu shimmer under a pale winter sun. Two armies face each other across the blood-stained snow, banners snapping in the bitter wind. This is the final battle of the Genpei War, a conflict that will decide the fate of Japan for centuries to come. Among the warriors preparing for what they know will be their last stand, one figure moves with deadly grace. Not a towering general, not a legendary male champion, but a woman whose name will echo through 8 centuries of history, whispered with equal parts reverence and disbelief. Her name is Tomoe Gozen, and what you think you know about samurai is about to change forever. The story of Tomoe Gozen is not just the tale of one remarkable warrior. It is a window into a lost world, a time when Japanese women rode into battle alongside men, when honor meant more than survival, and when a single individual could change the course of history through sheer force of will. But before we can understand Tomoe, we must first understand the world that forged her, a world of iron and poetry, of cherry blossoms and severed heads, of rigid codes and surprising freedoms. In the late 12th century, Japan was tearing itself apart. The Genpei War, which raged from 1180 to 1185, was not merely a conflict between two rival clans. It was a civilizational rupture, the violent birth pangs of a new Japan. On one side stood the Taira clan, wealthy, sophisticated, deeply entrenched in the imperial court at Kyoto. They had grown fat on court intrigue and imperial favor, their warriors more comfortable in silk robes than armor. On the other side stood the Minamoto clan, provincial warriors who had been systematically marginalized and humiliated by their Taira rivals. They were hungry, hardened by years in the rough eastern provinces, and they wanted blood. The catalyst came in 1180 when Prince Mochihito, frustrated by Taira dominance, issued a call to arms against them. The Minamoto answered. What followed was 5 years of warfare that would devastate Japan, a conflict so brutal and transformative that Japanese literature would obsess over it for generations. The tale of the Heike, the great war epic that chronicled these events, begins with words that still send shivers down the spine. The sound of the Gion Shoja bells echoes the impermanence of all things. Everything was impermanent in those days. Fortunes reversed overnight. Entire families were exterminated. The most powerful men in Japan died in mud and blood, far from the perfumed halls they once dominated. And in this world of chaos and transformation, a young woman named Tomoe was learning the arts of war. We know frustratingly little about Tomoe's early life. The historical records are maddeningly vague about her origins, as they often are with women of this period. What we do know comes primarily from the Heike Monogatari, compiled in the early 12th century, and from scattered references in other war chronicles. She was likely born around 1157, possibly in the province of Shinano, in the mountainous heart of Japan. Some sources suggest she was a concubine to Minamoto no Yoshinaka, one of the great Minamoto commanders. Others hint that she may have been his foster sister, raised alongside him in the household of a provincial warrior family. What is certain is that Tomoe was trained as a warrior from a young age. This was not as unusual as you might think. The late Heian period and early Kamakura era represented a unique moment in Japanese history, when women of the samurai class often received martial training. They were expected to defend their homes when their husbands were away at war, to manage estates, to make strategic decisions. Many learned to use the naginata, a curved blade mounted on a long pole, ideally suited for keeping sword-wielding attackers at bay. The naginata would become so associated with female warriors that it was later called the woman's weapon, though this romantic notion obscures the fact that plenty of male warriors also used it with devastating effectiveness. But Tomoe was different. The chronicles describe her as a master not just of the naginata, but of the bow, the sword, and mounted archery. In an age when horsemanship separated the elite warrior from the common foot soldier, Tomoe was renowned as an exceptional rider, capable of controlling her mount in the chaos of battle while loosing arrows with deadly precision. The Heike Monogatari states plainly, Tomoe was especially beautiful, with white skin, long hair, and charming features. She was also a remarkably strong archer, and as a swordswoman, she was a match for 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god, mounted or on foot. A warrior worth 1,000. Let that phrase settle in your mind. In a culture that measured martial prowess with exacting precision, where a warrior's reputation could determine life or death, this was not poetic exaggeration. This was the highest compliment a warrior man or woman could receive. Tomoe's commander and lord, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, was himself a figure of contradiction and tragedy. Born into the Minamoto clan, he had been sent as a child to the remote mountains of Shinano province after his father was murdered in the endless cycles of revenge that plagued the warrior class. Raised by a local warrior family, Yoshinaka grew up far from the sophisticated courts of Kyoto, learning warfare in its rawest, most brutal form. He was a provincial warrior through and through, blunt, fierce, supremely confident in battle, but utterly lacking in political subtlety. When the call came in 1180 to rise against the Taira, Yoshinaka answered with enthusiasm. He gathered an army from the mountain provinces, tough men who knew how to fight in difficult terrain, who could endure hardship that would break softer warriors, and among his most trusted commanders was Tomoe Gozen. By the 1183, Yoshinaka had achieved what seemed impossible. While other Minamoto commanders struggled in the early years of the war, Yoshinaka won a series of stunning victories against the Taira forces. His greatest triumph came at the Battle of Kurikara, fought in the mountains of Kaga province. Yoshinaka's army, outnumbered by the Taira force, lured their enemies into a narrow mountain pass. Then, in a move that demonstrated both tactical genius and absolute ruthlessness, Yoshinaka's men stampeded a herd of oxen, their horns fitted with burning torches, directly into the packed Taira ranks. Chaos erupted. Warriors and horses plunged screaming off the cliffs. The Taira army, so confident just hours before, was virtually annihilated. In the Heike Monogatari, the descriptions of Yoshinaka's battles frequently mention Tomoe, often highlighting her presence as a point of particular note. Tomoe had long black hair and a fair complexion, and her face was very lovely. One passage reads, before immediately adding the crucial detail, moreover, she was a fearless rider, whom neither the fiercest horse nor the roughest ground could dismay, and so dexterously did she handle sword and bow, that she was a match for 1,000 warriors, and fit to meet either god or devil. Think about what it meant for a chronicler to include these details. The Heike Monogatari was composed for an audience of warriors and nobles, people intimately familiar with the realities of combat. To claim that a woman fought as an equal among elite samurai, to state plainly that she was a match for 1,000 warriors, was to make a claim that had to be believable to an extremely skeptical audience. The inclusion of Tomoe in these accounts, far from mere poetic embellishment, suggests that her martial prowess was so undeniable that later chroniclers could not write the history without acknowledging her presence. But Yoshinaka's greatest military triumph would become the seed of his destruction. In the summer of 1183, he marched into Kyoto as a liberator, driving out the Taira forces that had dominated the capital. The imperial court, desperate for protection, granted him honors and titles. He should have been the hero of the hour. Instead, Yoshinaka's rough provincial manners and his army's behavior alienated the sophisticated courtiers. His men, unused to the refined customs of the capital, committed excesses. Food shortages plagued the city. Yoshinaka, brilliant in battle, proved hopelessly inept at politics. Worse still, Yoshinaka's success had bred jealousy among his own clan. His cousins, Minamoto no Yoritomo and Minamoto no Yoshitsune, controlled the main Minamoto forces in the east. They watched Yoshinaka's rise with growing suspicion and anger. The Minamoto had not fought for 5 bloody years just to see a provincial upstart seize all the glory. The clan that should have been united in victory began to fracture. By late 1183, the situation had become untenable. Yoshinaka held Kyoto, but he was increasingly isolated. The Taira remained a threat to the west. The other Minamoto commanders were maneuvering against him to the east, and the imperial court, which had initially welcomed him, now whispered that he was little better than a barbarian. In January 1184, Yoritomo made his move, sending an army led by his brilliant younger brother Yoshitsune to restore order to Kyoto. The order Yoshitsune intended to restore, of course, was one that excluded Yoshinaka entirely, preferably a dead Yoshinaka. Yoshinaka found himself facing an impossible situation. He could not retreat to his home provinces without abandoning everything he had fought for. He could not stay in Kyoto without being destroyed by his own cousins, and he could not defeat the combined forces now moving against him. His army, once formidable, had been worn down by months of occupation duty and minor skirmishes. Many of his best warriors had been killed in earlier battles. Others had deserted, seeing which way the wind was blowing. As Yoshitsune's forces approached Kyoto in late January 1184, Yoshinaka made a desperate gamble. He would strike first, attempting to seize control of the imperial palace and take the retired emperor Go-Shirakawa as a hostage. With the emperor in his hands, he might force a negotiated settlement. It was a wild, reckless plan, the kind of desperate strategy adopted by men who know they have nothing left to lose. The plan failed. Yoshitsune's forces moved faster than expected. Within days, Yoshinaka's army had been scattered. The streets of Kyoto ran red with the blood of his soldiers. By the morning of February 21, 1184, Yoshinaka only had a handful of loyal warriors left. Among them was Tomoe Gozen. The decision was made to retreat north, to try to reach friendly territory where they might regroup. But Yoshitsune's armies were everywhere, cutting off escape routes, hunting down the remnants of Yoshinaka's force. The noose was tightening with every passing hour. What happened next would become the most famous episode in Tomoe Gozen's life, the moment that would be retold and reimagined for 8 centuries. But the truth of that moment, preserved in the cold prose of medieval chronicles, is both more terrible and more human than any later romanticization could capture. The survivors fled northeast from Kyoto, racing toward the province of Omi. Yoshinaka had perhaps 300 warriors left, a pitiful remnant of the army that had once conquered the capital. They were exhausted, hungry, and they knew they were riding to their deaths. This was not a retreat, it was a funeral procession. Enemy forces harried them constantly. Every time they paused to rest, fresh attacks came. Warriors fell, cut down by arrows or dragged from their horses in brutal close-quarters combat. The winter landscape offered no mercy, just frozen rice paddies and bare trees that provided no cover from the pursuing forces. By the time they reached the plain of Owatsu, near the shore of Lake Biwa, Yoshinaka's army had been reduced to fewer than 50 men. They were surrounded on all sides by thousands of enemy warriors. There would be no escape from this place. The only question was how they would die. The Heike Monogatari preserves what may be Yoshinaka's final conversation with Tomoe. Realizing that the end had come, he turned to her and said, "You are a woman, so be off with you now. Go wherever you please. As for me, I intend to die in battle, or to kill myself if I am wounded. I would not want people to say in the last battle of Yoshinaka, he was accompanied by a woman."
Read those words carefully. Even in his final moments, facing certain death, Yoshinaka was concerned with his reputation, with what people would say about him. This was the samurai code in its rawest form, the overwhelming concern with honor and reputation that could override even the bonds of loyalty and affection. For Yoshinaka to die with a woman at his side, no matter how skilled a warrior she was, would invite mockery and diminish his final stand in the eyes of history. Tomoe's response is not recorded in the chronicles. We do not know what she said, or even if she said anything at all. What we do know is what she did next. She refused to leave. Not immediately, not without performing one final act that would justify her presence, that would prove beyond any doubt that she had earned her place among the warriors. The enemy forces were closing in, a tightening circle of spears and arrows. Somewhere in that mass of warriors was Onda no Hachiro Moroshige, a commander from the province of Musashi, renowned as a warrior of exceptional strength. The chronicles describe him as leading 30 riders, all picked men, all seasoned veterans. Tomoe charged directly at them. Try to picture this scene not through the lens of cinematic fantasy, but as the brutal, terrifying reality it must have been. A single rider, breaking from a surrounded group, galloping full speed toward a formation of 30 trained warriors. the thunder of hoofs on frozen ground, the shouts of men, the singing tension of bowstrings being drawn. And at the center of this maelstrom, a woman in armor, her face set with the absolute calm that comes only to those who have already accepted death. The Heike Monogatari states what happened next with remarkable clarity. Tomoe rode up beside Onda no Hachio Moroshige, pulled him down from his horse, pressed him against the pommel of her saddle, and cut off his head. Let that image settle in your mind. This was not a clean, quick duel from a samurai film. This was brutal, close-quarters combat. Tomoe had to close with Moroshige, a man described as exceptionally strong, grapple with him while both were on horseback, pull him from his saddle, hold him against her own saddle, and then decapitate him while his 30 warriors were trying to kill her. The strength, skill, and sheer cold-blooded focus required to accomplish this feat is almost beyond comprehension. And then, with Moroshige's head secured as proof of her prowess, Tomoe broke away from the enemy force and rode hard to the east. Behind her, she left the battlefield where Yoshinaka would make his final stand. Yoshinaka died that day at Awazu, just as he knew he would. The chronicles say he rode his horse into a frozen paddy field where it became mired in the mud. Before he could free himself, an enemy arrow struck him in the face. Rather than be taken alive or die at the hands of common soldiers, Yoshinaka committed seppuku, ritual suicide, the ultimate expression of samurai honor. He was 29 years old. His death marked the end of one chapter in the Genpei War, but not the end of the conflict itself. The Minamoto would go on to defeat the Taira completely in 1185 at the naval battle of Donoura, establishing a military government that would rule Japan for the next 7 centuries. But that is another story. What happened to Tomoe Gozen after Awazu remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. The historical record, so clear about her martial exploits, becomes frustratingly vague about her fate. Various legends and later accounts offer different versions, each more elaborate than the last, but none can be verified with certainty. Some sources claim that Tomoe, after escaping from Awazu, simply disappeared into obscurity, perhaps removing her armor and returning to a life far from the battlefield. Others suggest that she was captured by one of the victorious Minamoto commanders and became his wife or concubine, trading her warrior's life for the quiet existence of a provincial lady. The most romantic versions claim that she became a Buddhist nun, spending her final decades in prayer and contemplation, seeking peace after a life of violence. One particularly persistent tradition holds that Tomoe eventually married Wada Yoshimori, one of Yoritomo's powerful retainers, and lived quietly in Sagami province. This version claims she lived to a considerable age, perhaps into her 70s, dying peacefully long after most of her warrior contemporaries had perished on various battlefields. If this account is true, then Tomoe Gozen witnessed the complete transformation of Japan from the chaotic world of the Genpei War into the structured military government of the Kamakura shogunate. But we cannot know for certain. What we do know is that Tomoe's story did not end with her escape from Awazu. Instead, it was just beginning its transformation into legend. In the centuries following her death, Tomoe Gozen became something more than a historical figure. She became a symbol, an archetype, an answer to questions that Japanese culture continually asked itself about the nature of women, warfare, and honor. Her story was retold in countless versions, each generation adding new details, emphasizing different aspects, reshaping her image to fit contemporary concerns. During the medieval period, as the samurai class consolidated its power and developed increasingly rigid gender roles, Tomoe's story served as a reminder that women of the warrior class had once fought alongside men as equals. She appeared in no plays, in illustrated scrolls, in epic poems. Artists depicted her in armor, bow in hand, an idealized figure of martial beauty and deadly skill. By the Edo period, when Japan had been at peace for generations under the Tokugawa shogunate, Tomoe's story took on new meanings. She became a figure of nostalgia, a reminder of a more heroic age when honor meant more than comfortable survival. Woodblock print artists like Utagawa Kuniyoshi created dramatic images of her in battle, part of a broader cultural fascination with the violent romance of the Genpei War.
But something interesting happened during these retellings. As Japanese society became more patriarchal, as women of the samurai class were increasingly confined to domestic roles, the image of Tomoe began to change. Later versions often emphasized her beauty and loyalty more than her martial prowess. Some retellings transformed her final stand at Awazu into an act of romantic devotion to Yoshinaka, rather than a demonstration of her own warrior honor. The woman who had been described in the original chronicles as a warrior worth 1,000 gradually became, in many popular retellings, primarily a beautiful woman who happened to fight. This transformation reveals as much about Japanese society as the original chronicles do. Each age reimagined Tomoe according to its own values and anxieties about women's roles, about warfare, about the nature of honor itself. The historical Tomoe, insofar as we can glimpse her through the fragmentary records, was a professional warrior who fought because she had been trained to fight, who killed because killing was what warriors did, who fled the battlefield at Awazu not out of weakness, but because her commander ordered her to go. The legendary Tomoe became something more fluid, more symbolic, capable of representing whatever qualities a particular storyteller wanted to emphasize. This is not to dismiss the legends as mere distortions. Legends, even when they depart from historical fact, can tell us important truths about the cultures that create them. The fact that Japanese society, even as it became more restrictive of women's roles, continued to celebrate Tomoe Gozen, continued to tell her story, continued to recognize her as a legitimate warrior rather than dismissing her as an anomaly or an embarrassment, suggests something significant about Japanese attitudes toward female martial prowess. It is worth pausing here to consider the broader context of female warriors in Japanese history, because Tomoe Gozen, remarkable as she was not entirely unique. The notion that samurai culture was exclusively male is a modern misconception, born partly from Western assumptions about Asian gender roles, and partly from the way Japanese society evolved after the medieval period. During the late Heian and early Kamakura periods, women of the samurai class were expected to be capable of defending themselves and their homes. They managed estates when their husbands were absent, made strategic decisions, and sometimes led armies. The training of daughters in martial arts was considered a practical necessity in an age of endemic warfare, not a radical break from tradition. The archives preserve numerous examples of female warriors beyond Tomoe. Hangaku Gozen, who fought in the early 13th century, commanded 3,000 warriors in defense of a castle, personally leading sorties against besieging forces. She was eventually wounded by an arrow to the leg and captured, but her defense was so spirited that it earned praise even from her enemies. Hojo Masako, wife of the first Kamakura shogun, never fought in battle herself, but wielded enormous political and military power, effectively ruling Japan after her husband's death and coordinating military campaigns that preserved the shogunate. These women were not exceptions to some rigid rule. They were products of their time, operating within a system that, while certainly patriarchal in many ways, was more flexible about women's roles than the Japan that would come later. The increasing rigidity of gender roles in Japanese society was not a return to tradition, but a departure from it, a hardening of social boundaries that medieval Japan would not have recognized. Understanding this context makes Tomoe's story more rather than less impressive. She was not some impossible anomaly, some one-in-a-billion genetic freak who somehow managed to fight despite overwhelming social prohibitions. She was a woman who took the martial training available to women of her class and excelled at it to such a degree that even the male warriors around her recognized her as an equal, perhaps even as a superior. Her story is impressive not because she did something categorically impossible, but because she did something very difficult extraordinarily well. The weaponry that Tomoe would have used deserves close attention because understanding her tools illuminates how she fought. The chronicles specifically mention her prowess with the bow, the sword, and mounted combat. Let us consider each in turn. The Japanese bow, or yumi, was a formidable weapon, asymmetric in design, with the grip positioned about 1/3 from the bottom. This allowed it to be used effectively from horseback, where a symmetric bow would be unwieldy. Made from laminated bamboo and wood, a well-crafted yumi could send an arrow over 200 meters with enough force to pierce armor at close range. The art of kyujutsu, mounted archery, was considered the pinnacle of samurai martial arts during this period. A warrior like Tomoe would have trained from childhood to loose arrows accurately at full gallop, a skill that required extraordinary coordination, strength, and spatial awareness. The sword Tomoe would have carried was likely a tachi, the curved cavalry sword that preceded the later katana. Worn edge down, suspended from the belt, the tachi was designed for mounted combat, allowing a rider to draw and cut in a single fluid motion. Japanese swordsmanship at this time emphasized drawing cuts and powerful downward strikes rather than the intricate fencing techniques that would develop later. Combat was often shockingly brief, decided in moments of explosive violence. But perhaps Tomoe's most impressive feat at Awazu involved neither bow nor sword, but her skill at mounted grappling, what the Japanese called kumiuchi. To close with an enemy warrior on horseback, grapple with him, pull him from his saddle, and control him long enough to deliver a killing blow required not just strength, but exceptional technique and balance. This was no elegant duel. This was wrestling on horseback at high speed, where a single mistake meant death. The armor Tomoe would have worn would have been a complex assembly of iron plates laced together with silk cord, called oyoroi. A full suit could weigh 25 kilograms or more, but the weight was distributed across the body in a way that allowed surprising mobility. The armor was designed to protect against arrows and glancing sword cuts, while still allowing the wearer to ride, shoot, and fight effectively. The helmet, or kabuto, often featured elaborate decorations that served to identify the wearer and display their status. Fighting in this armor, on horseback, in winter conditions, for hours or even days at a stretch, would have been physically exhausting beyond modern comprehension. The warriors of the Genpei War period were not just skilled, they were phenomenally tough, conditioned from youth to endure hardships that would break most people. For Tomoe to excel in this environment, to be specifically praised for her strength and endurance, suggests a level of physical capability that borders on the superhuman.
As we approach the end of our journey through Tomoe's story, it is worth reflecting on what her legend has meant for Japanese culture and what it might mean for us today. In Japan, Tomoe Gozen remains a popular figure, appearing in everything from historical dramas to video games to manga. She represents a certain ideal of female strength that Japanese culture has never quite abandoned, even during its most patriarchal periods. Modern Japanese feminism has embraced Tomoe as a historical figure who complicates simple narratives about women's oppression. She is evidence that Japanese women's history includes moments of agency and power, that the story is more complex than a simple progression from ancient oppression to modern liberation. At the same time, some feminists have critiqued the way Tomoe's story has been sanitized and romanticized, arguing that emphasizing her beauty and loyalty over her martial skill serves to domesticate her, to make her safe for a culture still uncomfortable with powerful women. In the West, Tomoe Gozen has become increasingly well known as interest in samurai culture has grown. She appears in historical fiction, in academic studies of medieval Japan, in discussions about the role of women warriors throughout history. For many Western readers encountering her story for the first time, Tomoe challenges assumptions about both Japanese culture and medieval warfare. She forces us to reconsider what we think we know about gender roles in traditional societies, about the nature of the samurai, about the possibilities available to women in seemingly oppressive systems. But perhaps the deepest lesson of Tomoe's story is simpler and more universal. It is a reminder that human capability is not limited by the categories we create, that individuals in every age have exceeded the expectations placed upon them, that history is full of remarkable people whose stories challenge our assumptions. Tomoe Gozen was not a symbol or a metaphor. She was a real person who lived, fought, and eventually died in an age of iron and blood. The fact that she was a woman made her unusual, but it did not make her impossible. She existed, she fought, and she was good enough at it that even her enemies had to acknowledge her skill. In an age when we still argue about women's capabilities, when female athletes and soldiers still face skepticism about their physical abilities, when women in leadership positions are still described as breaking barriers, as if their presence in positions of authority is inherently remarkable,
Tomoe's story offers a useful corrective. 800 years ago, a woman fought on horseback with the best warriors of her generation and earned their respect through demonstrated skill. The world did not end. The social order did not collapse. Men continued to be men, and one woman proved that she could be their equal when given the training and opportunity. This is not to say that Tomoe's Japan was some gender-equal paradise. It absolutely was not. The privileges Tomoe enjoyed as a member of the warrior elite were denied to the vast majority of Japanese women, just as they were denied to the vast majority of Japanese men. Her story is not evidence that medieval Japan was secretly feminist. It is simply evidence that human potential is more varied and surprising than any ideology can capture. That in every age there are individuals who exceed the categories we use to define them. The frozen plain of Awazu, where Tomoe made her final charge, is still there today, now part of the city of Otsu in Shiga Prefecture. The landscape has changed beyond recognition. Rice paddies replaced by streets and buildings. The brutal medieval battlefield transformed into quiet suburban sprawl. But monuments remain, marking the place where Yoshinaka fell, where his remaining warriors made their final stand. And in those monuments, Tomoe is remembered, not as a footnote to Yoshinaka's story, not as a curious anomaly, but as a warrior whose prowess was worthy of commemoration alongside the male warriors who fell that day. Her image appears in museums, on memorial plaques, in the tourist materials that guide visitors through the history of the Genpei War. She has been granted a small piece of immortality, her name surviving long after the bodies of her enemies have turned to dust. This survival is itself remarkable. Medieval chronicles did not preserve the names of every warrior who fought in every battle. Most of those who died at Awazu are forgotten, their names lost, their deeds unrecorded. That Tomoe's story survived, that it was deemed worthy of inclusion in the Great War epics, that it was retold and embellished and passed down through generations, suggests that even in her own time, people recognized that there was something exceptional about her. The question of what exactly happened to Tomoe after Awazu will likely never be definitively answered. The historical record simply does not provide enough information. Perhaps she lived quietly and died forgotten, just another casualty of war who happened to survive a few more years. Perhaps she found peace in a monastery, seeking redemption or simply escape from a world that had become too violent even for a warrior. Perhaps she lived to see the Kamakura shogunate established, to see the world she had fought for transform into something new and strange. But what we can say with certainty is that Tomoe Gozen earned her place in history through deed rather than birth, through skill rather than political maneuvering. She did not inherit greatness or have it thrust upon her by circumstance. She took the opportunities her society offered, the martial training available to women of her class, and she pushed those opportunities to their absolute limit. She became not just a capable warrior, but an exceptional one, so skilled that even hostile sources acknowledged her prowess. And in doing so, she left us a gift, a story that has survived 8 centuries of war and peace, transformation and revolution. She gave us proof that human potential cannot be neatly categorized, that the boundaries we draw between possible and impossible are often more arbitrary than we realize, that in every age there are individuals who exceed our expectations and force us to reconsider what we thought we knew. The winter sun is setting over the plain of Awazu. The sounds of battle have faded into history, replaced by the ordinary noise of modern life. But if you stand there quietly and let your imagination carry you back across the centuries, you can almost hear it. The thunder of hooves on frozen ground, the clash of steel on steel, the shouts of warriors facing their final moments. And somewhere in that chaos, riding with perfect control, bow in hand and sword at her side, is a woman whose name echoes down through history. Tomoe Gozen, a warrior worth 1,000. Remember her.